11 U.S. warships sit off Venezuela's coast right now. 15,000 American troops. 20-plus airstrikes already conducted. 75 people dead. Nicolas Maduro just handed assault rifles to civilians and mobilized 200,000 troops. Trump authorized covert CIA operations. This is the largest Caribbean military buildup in decades, and it's growing every day. Everyone's asking the same question: what happens if America actually invades? The answer isn't what you think. The military reality explains why this won't look like Iraq or Afghanistan. It'll look worse. The hardware deployed to the Caribbean represents serious combat power. The USS Gerald R. Ford is the world's most advanced aircraft carrier. Electromagnetic catapult systems launch aircraft faster than steam catapults. Advanced arresting gear recovers aircraft more efficiently. The ship carries 75 aircraft including F-35C Lightning IIs and FA-18EF Super Hornets. 4,000 crew members operate this floating airbase. The Ford generates enough electrical power to support directed energy weapons when they're fielded. This single ship projects more combat power than most nations' entire air forces. 10 additional warships support the Ford: guided missile destroyers, cruisers with Aegis combat systems, a nuclear submarine whose exact location remains classified. These vessels carry hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of striking any target in Venezuela from international waters. 15,000 troops are now positioned in the Caribbean, a 50% increase in just weeks. The firepower advantage appears overwhelming. Venezuela's entire military budget equals what the U.S. spends maintaining this carrier strike group for 6 months. But raw firepower doesn't determine conflict outcomes. Vietnam proved that. Afghanistan proved that. Iraq proved that. The question isn't whether American forces can destroy Venezuelan military targets. They can. The question is, what happens after those first strikes? The operational reality gets complicated fast. Venezuela's military looks weak on paper. 109,000 active personnel. Most equipment dates from Cold War era. Russian-supplied aircraft with maintenance problems. Armored vehicles suffering from parts shortages. The country's economy collapsed. Inflation destroyed purchasing power. Military readiness sits far below wartime standards. American planners see these facts and assume easy victory. They're making the same mistake planners made before Vietnam, before Afghanistan, before Iraq's insurgency, because Venezuela isn't preparing to fight America's war. They're preparing to fight their war. The difference matters enormously. Maduro's government studied American operations for 2 decades. They watched precision strikes destroy Iraqi air defenses in 1991. They observed regime change in Libya using air power and special forces. They analyzed how quickly conventional military forces collapsed against American technology. Then they built a strategy specifically designed to make those capabilities irrelevant. The plan involves dispersing military assets across 280 locations nationwide, not concentrating forces in bases where cruise missiles can destroy them. Spreading equipment across jungle terrain, urban neighborhoods, and mountain valleys where finding targets becomes nearly impossible. American sensors excel at detecting large formations and fixed installations. They struggle against small dispersed units hiding among civilian populations. The initial American strikes would be devastating. Tomahawk missiles would destroy every fixed military installation, air defense radar sites, command centers, naval bases, communications facilities. The Venezuelan Air Force wouldn't get aircraft off the ground before American fighters achieved air superiority. Within hours, Venezuela would lose every conventional military capability. Maduro's government would cease controlling territory through normal military force. That's when the real fighting starts, because Venezuela prepared guerrilla warfare plans specifically for this scenario. The model comes from Colombia's FARC insurgency, small mobile units conducting hit-and-run attacks, avoiding direct engagement with superior American forces, attacking supply lines and isolated units. making occupation so costly that American political will collapses before military objectives are achieved. The Venezuelan military has been distributing weapons to civilian militias for months. The exact numbers remain unclear. Estimates range from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million armed civilians loyal to Maduro's government. These aren't trained soldiers. They don't need to be. Their job isn't winning battles. It's making occupation impossible by creating constant security threats that pin down American forces and generate casualties that erode domestic support. The terrain favors defenders. Venezuela contains vast jungle regions where conventional military advantages disappear. Mountain ranges create natural defensive positions. Urban areas like Caracas hold over 2 million people where guerrilla fighters can blend into civilian populations. American forces would control whatever ground they physically occupy. Everything else becomes contested territory. The comparison people make is Panama in 1989. Small country, weak military, quick American victory. Manuel Noriega captured within weeks. Mission accomplished. But Venezuela isn't Panama. The scale difference matters enormously. Panama has 4 million people concentrated in small geographic area. Venezuela has 30 million spread across territory larger than Texas. Panama had no significant insurgent forces. Venezuela has battle-hardened Colombian guerrillas already operating inside its borders who oppose American intervention. Panama's military offered minimal resistance. Venezuela's militias have been training specifically for asymmetric warfare against American forces. The operational requirements for occupying Venezuela exceed what America deployed to Iraq. Iraq required 170,000 troops at peak. Security experts estimate Venezuela would require 300,000 minimum to control population centers and prevent insurgent movement. The U.S. currently has 15,000 troops in the Caribbean. Deploying 300,000 would require months of buildup and would strain American military capacity globally. China watches Taiwan. Russia watches Ukraine. Iran watches the Middle East. Committing that many forces to Venezuela creates vulnerabilities elsewhere. The political complications make military operations even harder. Most Latin American countries oppose American intervention. Brazil shares an enormous border with Venezuela. Colombia hosts millions of Venezuelan refugees. Both countries have explicitly stated they won't support American military action. Without regional cooperation, American forces would lack bases for ground operations. Launching invasion from Navy ships works for initial strikes. It doesn't work for sustained ground combat requiring logistics support. The oil infrastructure presents specific targeting problems. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves, 300 billion barrels. But that oil requires specific refining processes. The infrastructure took decades to build. It spreads across hundreds of square miles. Destroying it would be easy. Capturing it intact would be nearly impossible while fighting insurgency. And if the infrastructure gets destroyed during combat, the environmental damage and economic consequences affect the entire hemisphere. Maduro's government knows this. They've positioned military assets near oil facilities specifically to complicate American targeting. Any strike on military forces near refineries risks massive environmental catastrophe. Any attempt to capture facilities intact requires ground forces vulnerable to ambush. The leverage this creates explains why Venezuela's government remains confident despite overwhelming American military superiority. The chemical and biological weapon concerns add another layer of complexity. Intelligence assessments suggest Venezuela may possess limited chemical weapons capability. The country operates legitimate pharmaceutical and agricultural chemical industries that could be repurposed. Whether functional weapons exist remains unclear, but the possibility forces American planners to prepare for contaminated environments that would require specialized equipment and training. The uncertainty itself serves as deterrent by complicating operational planning. The actual invasion scenario would unfold in stages. First, Cyber attacks would disable Venezuelan command and control. GPS jamming would disrupt military communications. Electronic warfare would blind radar systems. These initial actions happen before kinetic strikes begin. Then Tomahawk missiles would destroy air defenses and critical military infrastructure. F-35s would achieve air superiority by destroying any aircraft attempting to launch. B-2 bombers would strike hardened command bunkers using bunker buster munitions. Within 12 hours, Venezuela would lose conventional military capability. But controlling airspace and destroying bases doesn't control population. American forces would need to secure ports for bringing in ground troops and equipment. They'd need to capture airports for establishing air bridges. Each location would face potential resistance from militias and irregular forces. Civilians armed with rifles and RPGs couldn't stop American mechanized units, but they could inflict casualties and slow advances while news coverage broadcasts images globally. The urban warfare scenarios concern Pentagon planners most. Caracas holds 2 million people in dense urban environment. Militia forces could defend city block by block. Every building becomes potential fighting position. Every intersection becomes kill zone. American technology advantages diminish in close urban combat. Precision-guided munitions become less useful when enemies operate among civilians. The operational tempo slows. Casualties mount. Media coverage turns negative. This is why analysts believe ground invasion remains unlikely despite military buildup. The deployment serves political purposes more than military ones. It demonstrates American commitment to regime change. It pressures Venezuelan military officers to abandon Maduro. It provides capability for targeted strikes and special operations. But full-scale invasion presents strategic costs exceeding likely benefits. The more probable scenario involves continued pressure short of invasion, ongoing airstrikes against drug trafficking vessels, covert operations supporting opposition groups inside Venezuela, economic sanctions targeting regime officials, cyber operations disrupting government functions. These activities maintain pressure while avoiding commitment to ground combat that could become protracted insurgency. Maduro's strategy involves raising costs of intervention until American political will breaks. He mobilizes troops to demonstrate readiness. He arms civilians to create impression of widespread resistance. He invites international media to broadcast preparations. The goal isn't military victory against American forces. That's impossible. The goal is making intervention so costly politically that Trump administration decides the outcome isn't worth the price. Both sides understand this dynamic. American deployment demonstrates capability to intervene. Venezuelan mobilization demonstrates capability to resist. Neither side actually wants the conflict. Trump wants Maduro removed, but not at cost of protracted guerrilla war. Maduro wants to stay in power, but not at cost of destruction from American airstrikes. The military buildup is negotiating position. The question is whether either side miscalculates and triggers conflict, neither intended. The wild card remains Venezuelan military loyalty. Most officers live in same economic collapse affecting civilians. They face same shortages and inflation. Their families struggle with same problems as everyone else. American strategy appears designed to fracture military support for Maduro by demonstrating regime cannot defend them against American power. If senior officers abandon Maduro, he falls without invasion. If military remains loyal despite pressure, intervention becomes only option for regime change. Intelligence assessments suggest military loyalty is weakening but hasn't broken. Officers fear punishment for abandoning regime. They distrust American promises about what happens after Maduro falls. They remember chaos in Iraq and Libya after regime change. Uncertainty keeps them loyal to government they don't particularly support because alternatives look worse. So what actually happens if America invades Venezuela? The first week looks like overwhelming victory. Venezuelan military collapses. Maduro likely flees or gets captured. American forces secure Caracas and major cities. Media declares mission accomplished. Then the insurgency begins. Militias attack supply convoys. IEDs target patrol routes. Sniper fire comes from civilian buildings. American casualties mount slowly but steadily. Political support erodes at home. The occupation drags on for years with no clear exit strategy. The military reality no one wants to discuss publicly is that toppling Maduro would be easy. Controlling Venezuela afterward would be nearly impossible. The deployment offshore demonstrates capability. The strikes on drug vessels demonstrate will. But actually invading risks creating another Afghanistan. Years of counterinsurgency with no victory conditions. That's why the buildup continues, but invasion remains unlikely even as forces increase. Both sides understand the military reality. The question is whether political pressure forces actions that military analysis says to avoid.